Perfect. Very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this very special third edition of Masai Fireside Chat. And we'll probably wait for another 2-3 minutes just to wait for a couple of more people to join. And then we shall start. Before we start, I'll let you know the format. So if you're attending our Fireside Chat for the very first time, we will, the total duration of this session is 45 minutes. So we will close at 4:45 sharp. To start with, I will have a normal Q&A discussion with our guest. And after about 20 minutes, so that will be around 4:25, I will open the floor to you guys to share your questions for our guest. So you can type in your questions at that time in the chat section, or you can raise your hand. I hope everyone knows the raise hand option that that is provided by Zoom. So just raise your hand, and if you want to directly speak with our guest speaker, I will unmute you, and I'll ask you to unmute, and then you can unmute yourself and directly address your question to him. So yeah, that's how we will go ahead with this. Just gonna wait for 1 more minute. To those who are watching this on LinkedIn or YouTube, you too can share your questions in the comment section or in the chat section in case of YouTube Live, and we will be taking those questions as well from you directly at the time we have the audience Q&A segment. Right, so I think we have waited for 2 minutes. People will continue joining us. So welcome everybody again. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, that too on a Thursday. We really appreciate it. Hope you're well. And Fireside Chat is a series that we have started a couple of, I would say, in the month of May, where we wanted to bring in guest speakers, some of the top thought leaders from various industries as well as various job roles, who could share their insights, and for you as a wider community, whether it be HR or tech or product, for you to receive those insights and really have some takeaways from it. So we would request you that at the end of it, do share your feedback as well. And with that, I would like to welcome our guest today, Mr. Mitesh Manubarwala. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mitesh. How are you?
Pleasure to be here. I'm doing great. So Yash, I hope you're doing well, and so to everyone who's online now.
Yes, really well. All those who are online, you can mention in the chat how you're doing as well. So just to start introducing, there's a huge profile when it comes to Mitesh. It's really impossible for me to cover all of it in, say a couple of minutes. But just to give you a brief introduction about Mitesh, Mitesh is the director of HR at Maersk, which is one of the top most influential companies in the world. A very old company, in fact, has been around for many decades, has a very rich history behind it, and was even listed, has been listed multiple times in Time's 100 most influential companies. At Maersk, Mitesh makes future happen today. That's how he puts it. And he strives to be a business leader who's an expert on everything people, a trusted advisor, and a conscious keeper of Maersk's culture and values. He believes, he's in his career of over, which is over 15 years now, he has directly partnered with businesses and led HR teams across India, China, the Philippines, the US, and Europe. And before Maersk, he was with IBM, and before Maersk, he was with Sears, and before that, he started his career with IBM. So thank you so much, Mitesh. It is an absolute privilege to have you with us here. And just to give a disclaimer, we did have a third guest, which is the fire in the fireside chat, but the fire is down with COVID, so we are not joined by it today. So yeah, to start with, just a very basic question, Mitesh. Just tell our audience a little bit about yourself, please.
So first of all, Suyash, thank you for having me here. I also have to acknowledge all the wonderful coordination and everything else that's happened in the background. So truly appreciate that. I think you've done a fairly good job of introducing me. I couldn't have done better myself. It was very generous, so thank you. Maybe I could speak about this, which is because we're talking about engagement and we will be talking a lot about purpose. And over time, I have been thinking about my own purpose, not just as a professional, but as a person. And this is what I believe, which is my purpose is to help others realize their potential. What that means is I believe that each individual has limitless capabilities and untapped potential. A large part of it, if you look at the iceberg, lies beneath the iceberg, and we ourselves are not aware of it. As a professional, what that means is if you can channelize that potential, that then helps, of course, unleash organizational performance and not just achievement of goals, but far larger outcomes for the company. As a person, I'm someone who's curious. I like to think differently, or at least I like to believe that I think differently. I make a lot of investments in myself in terms of learning. So read a lot, like to travel, etc. As a person, I'm someone who sometimes struggles in large groups. So a bit of an introvert, but I do have the ability to develop close personal relationships as well. One of the, like I said, I'm a work in progress. And one of the key investments that I'm making in myself is I embarked on a journey to get certified as a coach last year. So there's a lot of work that goes around that, and that's what takes up my weekends besides family, of course. Yeah, so that's a little bit about me. I hope that helps, but happy to add if you want to ask anything specific.
No, I think that helps perfectly. I hope that the audience also gets to know you a little bit better. I think almost every single quality everything that you mentioned about yourself just also shows how you are perfect for the domain of human resources in general. I think people at Maersk are really lucky to have you there. I want to start with a question related to a major concern that has been for Indian corporate organizations, particularly IT. There was a report by Aon in 2021, which found that employee attrition in Indian IT organization has hit a 20-year high of 21%. In your experience, at what level is this attrition happening? Is it more freshers, more mid-level, maybe early level managers, or senior members or leadership? Where are you seeing in your experience that this is happening?
So the great resignation has hit everyone. It's not just India. So it's not just the tech world. It's global and it's pan-industry. And therefore, what we see is if you look at the overall trend lines by experience levels, you will find that everything has gone up. A little bit of an uptick, which is beyond the normal trend, is in the mid to senior level attritions, where typically people with 30 to 40 years of age. So you're typically talking about people who have maybe 7 to 15 years of experience. That's where Usually you will see lower attrition, but that's where we are seeing a higher uptick as well. From an Indian tech standpoint, of course, the 0 to 5 years is always attracted by the 30, 40, 50% increment. So that's always there. But if you ask me, this is probably a little bit of an outlier in terms of where it's gone beyond the proportionate increase for the other age groups.
Right. And have you seen this? I mean, in the past few months, we've been talking about a recession coming in, or there's another term, at least in the startup sector, which has been a funding winter. Uh, uh, do you see this trend changing now in the second half of 2022?
Do you mean the attrition or the recession?
Attrition.
We're already seeing that happening. Um, if you look at some of the factors, look, finally, attrition is also an outcome of three things. It's an outcome of supply in terms of jobs, demand from the job market, and the third one is in terms of other socioeconomic factors. If you look at it from a demand standpoint, a few things have happened. So one, there was a lot of pent up demand because of the pandemic. Um, and as the lockdown lifted, obviously we suddenly saw a spurt in terms of opportunities in the market. The second, if you look at, and since we're talking specifically about the Indian tech sector, um, we have broadly mirrored growth in Europe, but particularly in the US. The US post-pandemic has grown significantly. If you look at the market capitalization, for example, of the top 500 firms, it's gone up by almost 30 to 40%. What that means is that of course, in terms of transferring the growth to India, comes to the tech firms. So there are more deals being closed and thereby more jobs being created. So that's the first one. The second one is there has also been a huge spurt in what we call GCCs, the Global Capability Centers, or you call them GICs, or just GBSs, Global Business Centers. But whatever you call them, there's been a huge spurt there, and therefore that adds to the demand. The third piece, of course, up until the first half of the year, has been the startups. And because of high levels of liquidity in the market, and we can talk about that a little bit more, it basically means that they've been hiring big time as well. So this is something around the demand, right? Which is essentially a lot of jobs in the market. The second thing is then the supply. And that's where it gets a little interesting. If you look at the current state of where we stand from a supply standpoint, NASSCOM estimates that we have a deficit of around 21%. We have an overall tech pool of around 50 lakhs, and we probably need around 60 lakhs. So whenever you have a gap between the supply and demand, and there is more demand than supply, then obviously you will have everything from salaries going up to people being poached and a lot of opportunities in the market, of course. The most interesting thing, and this is the unique one, is on the socioeconomic side. There's been a huge shift in mindset of people. And what that shift in mindset has meant is that people have started putting a premium on things that were not as important to them earlier. So things like working in the right culture, being treated by respect, work-life balance. We hear a lot about flexibility and flexible workplace. People have started examining their priorities. Um, the US, for example, faces an even larger um, talent glut, if you want to call it that, right? They're hugely short of talent. One of the reasons is because, one, there was a lot of financial aid dispersed, The markets did well, and people who invested in the markets ended up with surplus money. And also money probably started meaning a little less to people in terms of, the difference between enough to get by on and get rich. So net, what that means is on one side, you have a lot of demand coming in. On the other side, you have supply, and supply is short. People leaving the job market, plus um, obviously the existing talent pool not being adequate. The third one is also skills. There has been a lot of change in the skills, and some of the key the key trends there is there is a trend is there is a movement towards preferring people who either have deep functional knowledge or people who are techno-functional in nature. And a lot of our existing talent pool may not have those skills. So all this, and when you throw in a lot of money that companies are throwing around in terms of packages and salaries, and that finally builds up to what we are calling currently the Great Resignation.
Thank you so much, Mitesh. I think that's a uh, very well explained, of course, but also very well explained response. But I think it also gave us an insight into aspects of so many aspects that we normally don't think about. I think normally we just think about, okay, oh yeah, people want more salary, so they're leaving. But there are just so many more factors. It is just so many variables in play, which also tells us just how complex a problem the Great Resignation has been. So thank you so much for sharing us. As a follow-up to this, since we were talking about the various reasons, maybe you could also expand upon just generally what was what was the reason for this rise in attrition? You did touch upon certain aspects already, but if you could give us a few more insights about that.
Sure. Anything specific you want me to focus on, because I spoke about the three major
Yeah.
pieces,
Well,
right?
I mean, for example, if you could share some examples of employees, you seeing actual cases of employees leaving and what were their personal reasons which relate to those.
See, primarily, this is why people leave, and this hasn't changed. What has changed is people's perspective, but the core reasons for people leaving, um, the number one reason, surprisingly, is not money.
Yeah.
The number one reason is that they have realized that they're working in a toxic environment. And a toxic environment comes from multiple factors. It comes from work-life balance. It comes from the colleagues that you work with. It could be in terms of feeling unappreciated, etc. But largely it comes from the people leader. So if you look at a study that Gallup did, for example, and this is based on years and years of research, they have found that 70% of all attritions, at least 70% of all attritions are attributable to the people leader. Right? So number one reason, people just don't like working where they're currently working. And it could be a wide variety of reasons, development, lack of a sense of purpose, toxic culture, like I mentioned, etc. The second key reason why people are tried is a disconnect between their expectations from a work life and flexibility perspective and what the organization has to offer. And there are very real examples around this, right? So one of the things in my current organization at Maersk that we realized is, and one of the reasons we did not push people to come back to work. If you look at female employees, for example, and I'm saying female employees because there are cultural realities, right, where primarily it's the woman in the house who takes care of the kids. We had a scenario where offices had opened up, but daycare centers were not open. In modern nuclear families, what that means is one parent has to be at home. Second, then if the organization is not a nice organization, and I'm going to put it in that very simplistic way, it's not a nice organization, you probably have a scenario where there's a kid crying in the background and the boss is not happy about it. Or suddenly there's a demand, right? That, okay, get on this call, but the person is, I don't know, busy with the child with something. Uh, so that's the second. And sometimes it's just about like I said, a change in perspective. People don't want to work for 12 hours a day anymore. So that's the second reason. The third reason, and this is of course the pull factor, which is the pay. And with the pay, two things have happened. One, of course, the job market hasn't jumped; it's galloped. It's gone crazy in terms of the salaries on offer. But the other thing that's happened is that there has also been a little bit of conservation of cash by the companies during the pandemic. So, except for the startups, if you look at typical companies, they were very conservative with their annual salary increments. And what that meant is that there was a bit of a deficit that built up in people's mind, but they were like, okay, the lockdown lift and then the company will make good. Suddenly they realized there is someone out there offering them 70% more. So if you cut away everything, these are the three reasons. The first one is the largest one. Everything a combination of culture, feeling unappreciated, purpose, or a lack of purpose, etc. The second is the work-life balance and flexibility, and then of course the third one is pay.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Mitesh. I want to just remind everyone who joined us later that today we are in conversation with Mr. Mitesh Manubarwala, who is the HR director at Maersk, one of Time's 100 most influential companies. And we will be rather talking about best practices with respect to employee engagement and how that can be used to reduce attrition and just improve retention. You talked about let's go to point number three there, which was pay. Or rather, let me come back to that data. I think first I want to understand what have been some effective solutions to counter this attrition that had been particularly high in the say past 2 years.
Yeah. Now smiling because you said let's go to pay. Everyone wants to go to pay.
I know.
Yeah. Look, I think some of these things honestly you can't do a lot about. Some of the larger macroeconomic things you can't do a lot about, but they resolve themselves as well. So these are cyclical things. For example, now with the central banks across, yesterday, for example, the Fed, the US central bank announced a 75 base point reduction, increase. So what that means is, in net terms, that the economic activity decreases over a period of time. And that then results in a slower job market. There's talks of recession and all that, so we will see. But it helps rationalize the supply and demand, and therefore it helps rationalize the attrition. Of course, if you're a business leader or the head of HR, you can't go to the board and say, be patient and things will work out. So you have to look at other avenues. And that's where things get interesting. From a short-term standpoint, a lot of organizations, for example, have looked at things like salary increments, offering stock options, and other monetary rewards. At Maersk, I can share with you that we tend to take a long-term view, and therefore our investments have been more in terms of improving the professional and personal lives of our employees. But just coming back to this piece, so that's the first one. And the way I look at it, that's a business continuity plan. So when you see in the news that one of the big tech companies, for example, has done an across the board 30% hike or something of that sort, or is recognizing high performers by giving them ESOPs, that's the BCP. And the long-term solution is this, which is three things. One, does the employee feel that they have what they need to do, perform their job successfully and well? And these are basics, right? A lot of companies, for example, during the pandemic made investments in providing some kind of amount so that they could set up a home office. We did that as well. So employees could spend on an ergonomic chair, table, other equipment, whatever they wanted. They had flexibility. And we were very flexible about it. Whatever you need, but up to a certain amount, but you can then claim. And so that's the first one, right? And similarly, if you look at it in today's environment, what else do you need? Do you need the right tools? Do you need the right systems, etc.? So whatever you need to successfully perform your role. The most important one in this is clarity of objectives. Unless you know what you're expected to do, you will not be able to do that. So that's the first one, right? The second one is then employees want to be recognized and appreciated. They want to feel cared for, and they want investment in them as professionals. So professional development and growth, of course, goes hand in hand with that. That's the second piece. The first one is I won't say easy to do because many organizations struggle to do this, but that's the one that you can do without high managerial or leadership capability in your organization. The second one is a little tougher. I can share some examples. So from a development perspective, there are multiple aspects. One of the things that, for example, that has helped at Maersk is we are transforming into the integrator of container logistics. What that means is there is a huge opportunity for employees across functions to redefine their roles and perform their roles very differently. For this, and to enable this huge capability shift, we have a learning platform available to them, which is essentially a democratized approach to learning. And there are functional learning academies. For example, we have a functional learning academy for learning logistics and services. I'm just putting it out on the table that that's the second one, and you will see every organization make disproportionate investments in developing their people. That goes hand in hand with having development plans and the conversations right now. So one of the things which we are focusing on is shifting from a culture of annual conversations to a culture where we're looking at regular monthly conversations in an environment which is non-threatening. So that's a little bit on development. With the with a growing organization, growth goes hand in hand as well internally, right? The more the organization grows, the more you grow. For example, we've moved from, I think over the last 3 years, we've moved from 40 billion in revenue to 62 billion in revenue, 60 or 62 billion in revenue. It helps us get we of course get new talent in, but then people inside grow as well. So that's the development piece. The other one is a little tricky, which is people feeling cared for. And that's a puzzle which is a little difficult to crack for two reasons. One, it deals with people, emotions, and a lot of non-ambiguous qualitative things. Second, because it's different for each individual. So you can't bring a policy or a process or a guideline saying, this is how we will do this. And that's where your capability, the capability of your line leadership or your line management comes into the picture. But finally, I will say this, it's also the easiest to crack, because when we talk about caring, that's fundamentally who we are as human beings as well. So it's about the person to person connect. The third one, which I mentioned, is people feeling appreciated, right? And appreciation is 360 degree, and it's non-monetary more than it's monetary. I'll leave it at that. So we spoke about two tiers, right? We spoke about people having being enabled to do their best at work, and then we spoke about people wanting to feel appreciated, cared for, and invested in terms of their career development and growth. And if you do all this, you've more or less taken care of attrition. But then there is one more, right? And this is what top organizations do. Because if you look at, I'll give you an example. Look at the defense forces. The pay isn't great. There is a real risk to life. You are in places which are not, I mean, you're not sitting in an air conditioned office, right? You look at people who work for the UN, people who work for these various, there are people, for example, who go to the underdeveloped part of the world and work with children's hunger. It's terrible. You see people dying every day. You see kids dying every day. There are horrible conditions. It's unsafe. And the pay isn't good. I can tell you that the pay isn't good. So why do people do it? People do that because fundamentally all human beings are driven by a sense of purpose. And companies which are able to, first of all, identify a sense of purpose for themselves, but effectively articulate that and align employees with that sense of purpose, where the employee identifies with that sense of purpose as well, uh, that's when you have true engagement. And if you have true engagement, you have an employee who obviously has everything they need to do their job well. They appreciated career, blah, blah, blah. Plus, they have a sense of purpose. It's highly unlikely that the 60% increment outside is going to attract them.
Thank you so much, Mitesh. And I really love the example of the armed forces. I think that really gives us perspective about what you're speaking. And I think it also, what I really liked about your response here was it also showed how multifaceted employee engagement itself is. Everything from whether it is your purpose, your culture, your balance, all of these things, I think, coming together to really uh, form this umbrella of employee engagement. So that it really does give us clarity on that. And to really talk about the pertinent question now, which was the whole point of this session, is what are some best practices for employee engagement that organizations can implement to really engage the employees well?
Let me do this. So let me walk all of you all through our journey. Uh, we had a different engagement measurement methodology a few years ago, and maybe 4 to 5 years back we switched to another one. And when we did that, we did not do well. Over the last few years, we have moved from there to a place where we are almost top quartile in terms of engagement overall at Maersk. If I look at the Maersk Global Service Centers, which is the unit I'm part of, we are top quartile. And it's been a very interesting journey. It started with the basics. And the basics are these, which is it started with a tightly governed process, HR getting into things and, have discussions happen with employees, etc., etc. And then if you go back to what I spoke about a little while earlier, which is, do people have what they need to do their job well? So basics, right? Like objective setting, making sure that people are well inducted into the organization. I remember in one of our centers, there was this conversation around inadequate chairs, things like that, right? Absolute basics. Um, Parallelly, along with that, a few other things like a robust rewards and recognition system. But more importantly, one of the big things was also recognizing publicly, doing these events and things like that. The most important part of this initial journey was this. Uh, this was, of course, not a people initiative or even a leadership initiative. This was a strategic prerogative for the organization. And as an organization, right up to the board of directors, everyone agreed that we must do better on engagement. So if you look at our business scorecards, for example, from a people metric perspective, from a business metric perspective, this is the only people metric that you will find. So we look at attrition, we look at attrition as a red flag. Is it going up somewhere? That's it. But what we look at is engagement. And trust me, that has worked. Um, so that's the first part of the journey. We started with the basics. The second part of the journey was this, which is investing in the people leader. And there are 2 or 3 things that if you can do as a culture, uh, it's hugely transformational. And these 2 or 3 things are, from a culture perspective, is focusing on empowerment, which is people feel empowered to do their jobs. But hand in hand with that, while they feel empowered to do their jobs well and make decisions, provide them with psychological safety, which means that they don't have to look over their shoulder if they make a mistake, as long as it's a genuine mistake. And then finally, care for them, both as people and also from a career perspective. Um, this part of the journey started with something that we all collectively agreed to focus on, which is coaching and create a culture of coaching. And this was a huge organization wide exercise. Um, and just to look at some numbers, um, we would have close to 1,000 people leaders at Maersk Global Service Centers itself. Right? We started from the top, but we actually got a huge percentage of them to go through trainings on coaching and how to be a coach. And when I say speak about coaching, essentially we wanted to transition from a culture of tell to a culture of ask, from a culture of the manager providing the solutions to a culture where the leader provokes the right thoughts because the person already has the answers. And I won't say that everyone's the most perfect coach right now. No way. We did some non-scientific discussions and probing and all that. I would say that it's been adopted well in 30% of the people leader population. Another maybe 30, 40, 50% is kind of trying to do their best. But the impact was huge. The people leaders, the managers transitioned to leaders who started caring about their employees, and the employees started caring a lot more about their work because now nobody was telling them what to do. So they had to figure it out, but they had the support and the right tools to figure out what they need to do. Um, so that's the second part of the transition. The third one, and this I'm very proud of. So we had our results come in very recently, and we came out at top quartile. And I was just speaking with someone and telling them, I was speaking with a business leader and telling him, I'm proudest because I had very few contributions to make over the last couple of engagement cycles. And the reason I had very few contributions to make is because it's self-sustained. So everything from objective setting to regular connects, your daily review meetings, to your weekly review meetings, to uh, development conversations, uh, reward and recognition events, appreciation mails, the whole aspect around empowerment and psychological safety. There is a massive self-sustained movement. And the other part of what I mentioned to that person that day was that I'm confident that we will be able to sustain it because look what we've come through. We've come through the pandemic and our scores have gone up in the pandemic uh, and everything else, right? So that was the third stage. We are at stage 4 now. Um, Recently, uh, as an organization, Maersk unveiled its new purpose statement. And our purpose statement is improving life for all by integrating the world. And this happened, and this was unveiled, I think, in the month of April or May. I think it's a truly powerful purpose statement, and there's a lot of effort that is now going in terms of taking this to each employee through sessions that we are conducting for them, bringing it into different aspects of work. But we're not there stage 4 wise. I think stage 3 has gotten us to top percentile or top quartile, the top 25%. But I'm sure that the purpose, if I look at it, it will add a lot of value and meaning to each employee who works with this organization.
Got it. Thank you so much, Mitesh. I think that really gave us a very, very strong insight into what an amazing place it must be, what an amazing thing it must be to work at Maersk. And it's amazing how you really, really care for your employees. I hope it really, really answers questions that everyone had around how they can build their employee engagement strategies. I of course, we keep getting this question. It was a question that we received earlier from people who had registered, and even right now, and someone DM'd it to me, which is that how do I tackle offer shopping done by selected candidates? And before I think I give you the opportunity to answer it, I'm pretty sure that the answer is that uh, you have pretty much answered it in terms of engage them and give them that culture and purpose. And if after that also they are still shopping, that maybe they're not worth your time. But of course, I will now give you the stage to answer that.
Yeah. See, I'll answer it in. So offer shopping happens in 2 stages, right? One is existing employees, the second is candidates. With existing employees, all that we spoke about. The only other thing I would say is also be practical. If you create the right culture where people are open and to have conversations around their pay, around their growth, etc., that's the first step. So it's important to be practical as well, right? Sometimes there's no one shoe fits all. You may have 3 top performers in your team, but let's say one of them has got married recently, or one of them just had a baby, and the expenses have gone up. So obviously compensation is, and a lot of attrition in normal times, not now, but even in normal times, you will see it revolves around these life events. So besides everything else, be a little practical as well and take a look at these things. You may or may not be able to do something, but my recommendation is always be transparent. And if you can't do something now, at least provide a view. We'll look at it 6 months down the line, but these are practical realities we have to look at beyond just looking at a set of guidelines. For candidates, what really helps is active engagement, and I have seen very, very few organizations do it. I think this is something that we have been trying to get better at as well. What that means is you roll out the offer. Typical notice period is 60 to 90 days. You roll out the offer, person accepts the offer, and that's it. But can we start engaging with that person? Maybe call that person into the office to meet some of the peers, meet some of the other leaders, start sharing some stuff. I can tell you that globally we have a practice, and this is more of a cultural thing, where for a lot of companies in Europe, including Maersk, you will see the name of the person who's going to join in the next role announced sometimes 2 or 3 months in advance. So they put down their papers and they inform their current organization, and then there's a mail saying that, we have selected so and so person, etc. So that may not be feasible here, but some of these things, right, to start inducting them into the organization and not waiting for the last minute does help from 2 perspectives. One, it brings the person closer to the organization. Second, it also builds a little bit of psychological pressure, right? It's a little more difficult to say no to someone, or to go back to someone and say, oh, I was going to join, but I'm not joining, when you know the person well. So that would be what I would say around offer shopping. Beyond that, very little you can do. I think, unfortunately, our industry is such that companies are issuing counter offers. uh, and the closer the person is to the exit date in the current organization, the more likely that person is to get a counter offer from or another offer from another organization. I think that's something that leaders of the industry need to think of, uh, and we need to consider whether that's right or wrong. It's like one of those things in cricket, right? When a batsman is out but given not out, does the batsman walk or not? So there's no right or wrong, but it just depends on the example that we want to set.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mitesh. I hope that answered this question, which I'm sure a lot of you had. And also, I would encourage you because we had our very first episode of Fireside Chat a couple of weeks back, in which we had addressed this very question. The whole session was on that. So do have a look at that as well if you want some more tips. So with this, we have come to the end of today's session. It has been our absolute honor and privilege, Mitesh, to have you here to it's been a privilege to receive your golden nuggets of wisdom because this is a topic which at the moment is on the top of the head for a lot of people, particularly in the HR and talent acquisition community. But it's usually a little difficult to have one place where you get all insights, and that too insights so thorough. So, Mitesh, thank you so much for joining us today and really sharing everything with us.
Thank you so much for having me here. And thanks to everyone who's connected as well. I see at least one familiar face as well. But thanks to everyone who's joined. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. So if you want to continue the conversation, feel free to drop me a note. Yeah. Thank you, Suyash.
Thank you, Mitesh, and thank you everyone who joined us today. Please remember that this is a fortnightly series, so we'll be back again in 2 weeks' time with a new guest for you. We will share the details with you very soon. Stay tuned on our LinkedIn page, and we share the details. Have a wonderful week ahead, wonderful weekend ahead, and see you in 2 weeks. Thank you, everyone, and have a